Fairy Tales from the Arabian Nights. The second voyage of Sinbad the sailor I designed. After my first voyage, to spend the rest of my days at Baghdad, but was not long ere I grew weary of a quiet life. My inclination to trade revived. I bought goods suited to the commerce I intended, and put to sea a second time with merchants of known probity. We embarked on board a good ship, and after recommending ourselves to God, set sail. We traded from island to island, and exchanged commodities with great profit. One day we landed on an island covered with several sorts of fruit trees, but so unpeopled that we could see neither man nor beast upon it. We went to take a little fresh air in the meadows, and along the streams that watered them. While some diverted themselves with gathering flowers, and others with gathering fruits, I took my wine and provisions, and sat down by a stream betwixt two great trees, which formed a curious shape. I made a very good meal, and afterwards fell asleep. I cannot tell how long I slept, but when I awoke the ship was gone. I was very much surprised to find the ship gone. I got up and looked about everywhere, and could not see one of the merchants who landed with me. At last I perceived the ship under sail, but at such a distance that I lost sight of her in a very little time. I leave you to guess at my melancholy reflections in this sad condition. I was ready to die with grief. I cried out sadly, beat my head and breast, and threw myself down upon the ground, where I lay some time in a terrible agony. I upbraided myself 100 times for not being content with the produce of my first voyage that might well have served me all my life. But all this was in vain, and my repentance out of season. At last I resigned myself to the will of God, and not knowing what to do, I climbed up to the top of a great tree, from whence I looked about on all sides to see if there was anything that could give me hope. When I looked towards the sea, I could see nothing but sky and water, but looking towards the land I saw something white, and, coming down from the tree, I took up what provision I had left and went towards it, the distance being so great that I could not distinguish what it was. When I came nearer, I thought it to be a white bowl of a prodigious height and bigness, and when I came up to it I touched it and found it to be very smooth. I went round to see if it was open on any side, but saw it was not, and that there was no climbing up to the top of it, it was so smooth. It was at least 50 paces round. By this time the sun was ready to set, and all of a sudden the sky became as dark as if it had been covered with a thick cloud. I was much astonished at this sudden darkness, but much more when I found it was occasioned by a bird of a monstrous size that came flying toward me. I remembered a fowl called Roc that I had often heard mariners speak of, and conceived that the great bull, which I so much admired, must needs be its egg. In short, the bird lighted and sat over the egg to hatch it. As I perceived her coming, I crept close to the egg, so that I had before me one of the legs of the bird, which was as big as the trunk of a tree. I tied myself strongly to it with a cloth that went round my turban, in hopes that when the Roc flew away next morning, she would carry me with her out of this desert island. And after having passed the night in this condition, the bird really flew away next morning, as soon as it was day, and carried me so high that I could not see the earth. Then she descended all of a sudden, with so much rapidity that I lost my senses. But when the Roc was settled, and I found myself upon the ground, I speedily untied the knot, and had scarcely done so when the bird, having taken up a serpent of a monstrous length in her bill, flew away. The place where she left me was a very deep valley, encompassed on all sides with mountains, so high that they seemed to reach above the clouds, and so full of steep rocks that there was no possibility of getting out of the valley. This was a new perplexity, so that when I compared this place with the desert island from which the Roc brought me, I found that I had gained nothing by the change. As I walked through this valley, I perceived it was strewn with diamonds, some of which were of surprising bigness. I took a great deal of pleasure in looking at them. But speedily I saw at a distance such objects as very much diminished my satisfaction, and which I could not look upon without terror. They were a great number of serpents, so big and so long that the least of them was capable of swallowing an elephant. They retired in the daytime to their dens, where they hid themselves from the roc, their enemy, and did not come out but in the night time. I spent the day in walking about the valley, resting myself at times in such places as I thought most suitable. When night came on, I went into a cave, where I thought I might be in safety. I stopped the mouth of it, which was low and straight, with a great stone, to preserve me from the serpents, but not so exactly fitted as to hinder light from coming in. I supped on part of my provisions, but the serpents, which began to appear, hissing about in the meantime, put me into such extreme fear that you may easily imagine I did not sleep. When day appeared, the serpents retired, and I came out of the cave trembling. I can justly say that I walked a long time upon diamonds without feeling an inclination to touch any of them. At last I sat down, and notwithstanding my uneasiness, not having shut my eyes during the night, I fell asleep after having eaten a little more of my provisions. But I had scarcely shut my eyes when something that fell by me with great noise awakened me. This was a great piece of fresh meat, and at the same time I saw several others fall down from the rocks in different places. I had always looked upon it as a fable when I heard mariners and others discourse of the Valley of Diamonds, and of the stratagems made use of by some merchants to get jewels from thence. But now I found it to be true. For, in reality, those merchants come to the neighborhood of this valley when the eagles have young ones, and throwing great joints of meat into the valley, the diamonds, upon whose points they fall, stick to them, the eagles, which are stronger in this country than anywhere else, pounce with great force upon those pieces of meat, and carry them to their nests upon the top of the rocks to feed their young with, at which time the merchants, running to their nests, frighten the eagles by their noise, and take away the diamonds that stick to the meat. And this stratagem they make use of to get the diamonds out of the valley, which is surrounded with such precipices that nobody can enter it. I believed till then that it was not possible for me to get out of this abyss, which I looked upon as my grave, but now I changed my mind. For the falling in of those pieces of meat put me in hopes of a way of saving my life. I began to gather together the largest diamonds that I could see, and put them into the leathern bag in which I used to carry my provisions. I afterwards took the largest piece of meat I could find, tied it close round me with a cloth of my turban, and then laid myself upon the ground with my face downward, the bag of diamonds being tied fast to my girdle, so that it could not possibly drop off. I had scarcely laid me down before the eagles came. Each of them seized a piece of meat, and one of the strongest, having taken me up, with a piece of meat on my back, carried me to his nest on the top of the mountain. The merchants fell straightway to shouting, to frighten the eagles, and when they had obliged them to quit their prey, one of them came to the nest where I was. He was very much afraid when he saw me, but recovering himself, instead of inquiring how I came thither, he began to quarrel with me, and asked why I stole his goods. "You will treat me," replied I, "with more civility when you know me better. Do not trouble yourself. I have diamonds enough for you and myself too, more than all the other merchants together. If they have any, it is by chance. I chose myself in the bottom of the valley all those which you see in this bag, and having spoken those words, I showed them to him." I had scarcely done speaking, when the other merchants came trooping about us, much astonished to see me, but they were much more surprised when I told them my story. Yet they did not so much admire my stratagem to save myself as my courage to attempt it. They took me to the place where they were staying all together, and having opened my bag, they were surprised at the largeness of my diamonds, and confessed that in all the courts where they had never seen any that came near them. I prayed the merchant to whom the nest belonged, for every merchant had his own, to take as many for his share as he pleased. He contented himself with one, and that too the least of them, and when I pressed him to take more, without fear of doing me any injury, "No," said he, "I am very well satisfied with this, which is valuable enough to save me the trouble of making any more voyages to raise as great a fortune as I desire." I spent the night with those merchants, to whom I told my story a second time, for the satisfaction of those who had not heard it. I could not moderate my joy when I found myself delivered from the danger I have mentioned. I thought I was in a dream, and could scarcely believe myself to be out of danger. The merchants had thrown their pieces of meat into the valley for several days, and each of them being satisfied with the diamonds that had fallen to his lot, we left the place next morning altogether, and traveled near high mountains, where there were serpents of a prodigious length, which we had the good fortune to escape. We took ship at the nearest port, and came to the Isle of Rhoa, where the trees grow that yield camphor. This tree is so large, and its branches so thick, that 100 men may easily sit under its shade. The juice of which the camphor is made runs out from a hole bored in the upper part of the tree, is received in a vessel, where it grows thick, and becomes what we call camphor. And the juice thus drawn out the tree withers and dies. There is in this island the rhinoceros, a creature less than the elephant, but greater than the buffalo. It has a horn upon its nose about a cubit long. This horn is solid, and cleft in the middle from one end to the other, and there are upon it white lines, representing the figure of a man. The rhinoceros fights with the elephant, runs his horn into him, and carries him off upon his head. But the blood of the elephant running into his eyes and making him blind, he falls to the ground, and then, strange to relate, the roc comes and carries them both away in her claws to be food for her young ones. Here I exchanged some of my diamonds for good merchandise. From thence we went to other isles, and at last, having touched at several trading towns of the main land, we landed at Balsara, from whence I went to Baghdad. There I immediately gave great alms to the poor, and lived honorably upon the vast riches I had gained with so much fatigue.